It was 4:57 a.m. The Pacific stretched in stillness, too quiet to be real. A dark mirror reflecting the first streaks of dawn. On radar screens across the region, a sudden flare of activity erupted. A vertical line slicing through black space, climbing faster than any civilian craft should. Silent, precise, unstoppable. The North Korean missile had launched. In Tokyo, the calm of early morning shattered instantly. Sirens wailed faintly at first, then grew louder as emergency alerts penetrated homes, offices, and streets. Coffee cups trembled in hands, screens flickered, and a momentary collective pause seized the city. Officials didn't flinch in fear. They calculated, measured, anticipated. Every second mattered. One wrong estimate and disaster would strike before clarity arrived. Across command centers, officers froze for just a heartbeat, eyes locked on trajectories, inputs, and altitudes. The missile was a message, unmistakable, not just aimed at territory, but at global attention. It wasn't the firepower that demanded respect, it was the implication. Who would react first? Who would blink? Each nation's nerve tested against the clock, the missile itself a silent interrogator. The Pacific waters reflected the first glimmers of sunrise, but the reflection betrayed nothing of the violence in motion above. Analysts scrolled through flight paths, calculating speeds that seemed to defy expectation. Satellites confirmed, radars tracked, and somewhere below the calm, submarine hulls shifted, positioning themselves for a potential contingency. Every crew member knew their role, every captain aware that foresight would dominate over firepower, strategy over impulse, precision over panic. Across Japan's sprawling defense network, alerts triggered cascading actions. Intercept algorithms ran, drones deployed silently in simulated readiness, anti-missile batteries cranked into alert. Engineers monitored each output, each calculation, each digital ping, a heartbeat against the invisible threat above. The missile passed over quietly, leaving no physical scar in its wake, yet its presence rippled through decision-making like a shockwave. One instant could escalate, one misjudgment could turn a message into catastrophe. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, the U.S. Navy moved with deliberate, almost imperceptible efficiency. Carrier strike groups adjusted bearings, destroyers shifted formation, and submarines repositioned under Arctic and Pacific waters alike. No panic, no broadcasted alarm, only precise, disciplined dominance, silent assurance to allies, subtle warning to adversaries. Pyongyang strategists did not realize immediately that their show of power had triggered a countermeasure far colder and more calculated than mere retaliation. The missile climbed, traced its arc, and passed quietly over Japanese airspace. But the tension didn't dissipate. It thickened. Radar screens flickered with every micro-adjustment in flight path, every minor perturbation creating ripples of possibility. What would you do with 10 seconds to decide between action and inaction? One small choice could ignite decades of escalation, or diffuse a global crisis with the same heartbeat. In every command center, from Tokyo to Washington, officers considered probabilities, calculating risk with algorithmic precision. The missile was more than an object. It was a test, a probe, a psychological shockwave designed to measure response, patience, and restraint. And above all, it was a reminder that dominance often doesn't roar. It glides silently, unseen, until the moment of decision. As the missile arced toward the horizon, the first ripple of relief began, but it was faint and incomplete. No celebration, no finality. Every observer knew the game had changed. Lessons were embedded in seconds. Foresight exceeds force. Strategy outweighs firepower. Calculation prevails over impulse. The world had been forced to pause, to measure, to reflect on the invisible balance that held nations in fragile suspension. Even as the missile left Japanese airspace, its shadow lingered in minds and systems alike. Pyongyang had fired a warning. The U.S. Navy remained poised, carriers and submarines holding positions like silent predators, ready to act if the invisible threat reappeared. The response, unannounced and precise, was already in motion. And in this moment of high-stakes tension, one question remained unresolved. Who truly controlled the Arctic-Pacific theater? and who would strike first if the next move came. The missile was gone from the skies, but the shock wave of possibility stretched further than any trajectory could measure. Every system, every command, every captain had been tested. The calm above water had returned, but beneath it, the ocean and strategy held secrets, ready to explode at a single misstep. The clock ticked on, and one silent principle was clear. In the game of nations, patience and precision often wield more power than the loudest firepower. And the world watched, waiting for the next move to redefine dominance forever. It was 4:58 a.m., a single moment stretching longer than any minute should. The missile had already passed overhead, invisible but undeniable, a streak of tension carved across the pre-dawn sky. In Tokyo, sirens erupted like a shockwave through the sleeping city, echoing off high-rises and over quiet neighborhoods. Windows rattled, car alarms screamed, and in kitchens, lights flickered as families froze mid-motion. 1 second, the world was normal. The next, reality was fractured by unseen fire. Emergency alerts blinked and beeped across devices, drowning the quiet of coastal towns in a digital pulse that refused to be ignored. Phones vibrated in pockets. Screens illuminated faces pale with instinctive understanding. The missile didn't strike, yet its presence was a silent punch, landing hard on the psyche of everyone who sensed it. Invisible danger, felt rather than seen, a lesson in tension. Sometimes the threat itself is the weapon. Inside command centers, Japanese defense systems came alive with measured urgency. Digital maps updated relentlessly, plotting trajectories, recalculating impact zones, and estimating margins of error with exacting precision. Every second counted. Every input could tip the scales toward catastrophe or avert it. Analysts scrolled through simulations, predicting consequences as if they could trace fate itself through algorithms. The missile had already tested them. Its path a challenge, a riddle, a mirror of human foresight versus technological mastery. Voices in the room were calm, almost clinical, but beneath the measured tones, raw tension rippled like currents in deep water. Officers exchanged glances, not words. Understanding passed silently. One misjudgment, a decimal point, a latency in reaction, could rewrite history. The missile didn't hit, but the world had been reminded of its fragility. Cities remained intact, but perception had shifted. Danger, unseen yet undeniable, had left its mark. Outside, the air was heavy with anticipation. Japanese citizens instinctively recalculated every step, every sound, every shadow. The hum of life continued, but it carried a weight it hadn't had before. People paused mid-walk, scanning the horizon. Streetlights reflected on rain-slicked roads. Cars slowed. Every heart beat a little faster, synchronized unknowingly with the pulse of global strategy unfolding overhead. Command rooms expanded their digital focus, tracking potential fallout, potential next strikes. Analysts compared multiple scenarios: one missile versus a coordinated strike, single launch versus salvo, warning time versus reaction speed. Each combination held infinite permutations. One thought: what would you do with 10 seconds left to decide between defense and exposure? What choice could prevent calamity in the blink of a satellite scan? Calculation became instinct. Instinct became strategy. Strategy became survival. Beyond the walls, systems hummed and blinked in precise order. Radar grids rippled, anti-missile batteries shifted orientation, drones adjusted paths, and satellites communicated silently overhead. Technology moved with disciplined efficiency, a symphony of precision instruments dancing in time with human anticipation. Pyongyang had intended intimidation, yet the invisible missile had activated something more powerful than fear: focused preparation. Its path became a lesson in deterrence. Threat had triggered dominance, invisibly and instantly. Time stretched, not forward but in tension. The missile's arc receded into the horizon, a ghost imprint lingering in systems and minds alike. The moment was over, yet its resonance continued to ripple through oceans, cities, and command centers. Analysts exhaled slowly, recalculated, and noted discrepancies. Officials realized a quiet truth: Sometimes, the absence of impact carries a louder warning than a blast. Silence is a signal. Inaction, a test. Foresight, the ultimate weapon. The Pacific remained calm above, its waters unbroken, reflecting the early morning glow. Yet beneath, in the digital architecture of defense, the missile's presence had ruptured assumptions. Every trajectory had been measured, every contingency considered, every second scrutinized. The invisible strike had rewritten perception, forcing a paradigm shift. In modern warfare, dominance isn't always demonstrated with firepower. Sometimes it is shown with patience, precision, and anticipation. Even as the missile vanished from sight, the world had shifted. Citizens, analysts, and commanders alike felt a collective heartbeat of tension, the pulse of a silent war, the reminder that even unseen threats demand attention, strategy, and respect. And somewhere, far beyond the coast, hidden eyes observed the responses unfolding, understanding that the launch, though invisible, had awakened a system prepared to answer with far-reaching force. What happens next, no one can fully predict, but the Arctic-Pacific balance has already been tested, and every observer knows the next move will decide more than a missile's fate. It will define the edge of control itself. It was 5:01 a.m. Too quiet to be real. Across thousands of miles of open ocean, the first glimmers of sunrise reflected off calm waves. Yet beneath that serene surface, the U.S. Navy was already moving. Far from headlines, far from cameras, precision had begun to speak louder than words. Carrier strike groups shifted their formation, hulls slicing water with deliberate intent. Each ship, each crew synchronized with invisible signals, a choreography designed to project dominance without a single shot fired. On the bridge of an Aegis destroyer, consoles flickered with digital life. Threat matrices updated every fraction of a second. Missile trajectories, radar sweeps, sonar contacts, all calculated, recalculated, and double-checked. No alarm screamed, no sirens blared. The tension was subtle, hidden in the hum of machinery and the quiet murmurs of officers exchanging concise data. Force without fire, deterrence as art. This was the invisible hand of control, moving silently but unmistakably through the Pacific. Beneath the waves, submarines shifted depth and bearing. Dark silhouettes glided under ice-cold currents, plotting positions and angles no satellite could discern. In their quiet maneuvering, every sonar ping, every vibration, every heartbeat became a part of a larger strategy. The Navy was a living algorithm, calculating probabilities faster than any human mind alone could, balancing patience against instantaneous action. Pyongyang's analysts, watching from afar, could only perceive pieces of the pattern, and the pieces didn't add up. Something was off. Very off. Back on the carriers, crew members read and executed orders that had been drilled into muscle memory over years. Engines hummed. Flight decks rotated aircraft silently into launch positions. Every decision reflected the principle that dominance is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quietest moves that speak the loudest. Each micro-adjustment in speed or bearing was a warning. The world is watching, every misstep noted, every advance met with counterbalance. The missile had passed, yet the shadow of its path lingered, provoking action and response in perfect harmony. Decision-makers in distant rooms calculated impact zones and reaction windows. Calculations of risk versus consequence, advantage versus vulnerability were played out in real time, invisible to the civilian eye. The U.S. Navy's movement wasn't just reaction, it was assertion, a silent reminder that strategy outweighs sheer firepower. Foresight trumps impulse and precision dominates chaos. From the skies above, satellites recorded, drones patrolled, and reconnaissance feeds stitched a picture together that no single human could process alone. Each feed fed into decision algorithms that distributed guidance across vessels and crews. Every move was deliberate, every countermove anticipated. And yet, the true effect was psychological. Pyongyang's observers began to feel the weight of control. The threat they had unleashed was meeting something far colder, far more calculated than they had imagined. Across the ocean, waves lapped gently against hulls, but the calm was deceptive. Every officer understood the paradox. Stillness often conceals the greatest power. The U.S. Navy did not need to fire to assert dominance. Its very presence, its precision, its coordinated movement through space and time imposed a silent shockwave across the theater of operations. Analysts, leaders, and strategists on both sides now measured influence, not by explosions, but by alignment, readiness, and unseen reach. Even as radar screens tracked distant blips and digital maps updated with each microsecond, one truth became clear. Deterrence is invisible, but its consequences are undeniable. One miscalculation, one delayed decision, one overlooked variable could ignite conflict or avert disaster entirely. The missile had been a spark. The response, quiet and precise, was the fire that could consume or contain. Time stretched like elastic, every second a heartbeat, every decision a potential turning point. Across multiple decks and deep under the ocean, the Navy moved in perfect synchrony, executing centuries of strategy in the span of moments. Pyongyang's analysts watched, puzzled, alarmed, beginning to understand that their launch intended to intimidate had instead revealed a far-reaching dominance they could not match. The ocean remained calm above, but beneath the waves and across command centers, an unseen war of anticipation raged. Every crew member, every officer, every sensor and console played its part in a silent theater of power. The missile had vanished, but its shadow lingered, its lesson clear. In modern warfare, mastery lies not in the first strike, but in calculated, controlled dominance. And as the U.S. Navy held its positions, poised yet unseen, one question echoed silently across the Pacific. Who truly controls the theater, and who will dare make the next move? The calm above the waves was deceptive. The silence was not absence, it was anticipation. The world had witnessed a warning, an assertion, and a silent demonstration of dominance. The U.S. Navy had responded, not with fireworks, not with noise, but with something far more terrifying. Perfect, patient, relentless precision. And the next move, waiting beyond the horizon, would determine whether the spark ignited or was extinguished. It was 5:10 a.m., too quiet to be real. Inside Pyongyang's dim command rooms, fragmented intelligence reports scrolled across screens, each one a piece of a puzzle no one fully understood. The U.S. Navy's movements were subtle, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. Carriers shifting, destroyers recalculating bearing, submarines gliding through depths like silent predators. Every data point sent a chill down the spine of every officer watching, every analyst calculating margins of error with trembling precision. The missile had been launched as a warning, a statement of intimidation meant to command attention and demonstrate capability. Yet what arrived instead was something colder, something more precise, something that didn't roar. It calculated. No fire, no immediate retaliation, just presence. And in its silence, it screamed. The oceans themselves became a message, each ripple a pulse of warning that could not be ignored. Officers exchanged tense glances, muttered fragments of analysis, and scrolled through digital feeds trying to reconcile what they were seeing. Algorithms processed movement faster than human cognition could follow. Carrier positions adjusted in real time, defensive grids recalculated, and sonar echoes whispered through the deep. Pyongyang's command realized with growing unease that the launch had triggered something far more dangerous than any explosive return. It had awakened a disciplined force that moved in shadows, a force that could dominate without ever striking first. Outside the command centers, the city remained deceptively calm. Streets were quiet. Subways ran. Life continued. Yet inside, every second stretched into eternity. Decision-makers knew that one misstep, one delay, one misinterpretation of incomplete intelligence could trigger consequences that no one could reverse. The missile itself was irrelevant now. The U.S. Navy had imposed a new paradigm. Force was measured not in destruction, but in control, in timing, in calculated readiness. The real danger was anticipation, the invisible dominance that was unfolding silently across the Pacific. The missile's psychological shockwave had been met with algorithmic precision, the kind of preparation that makes a casual observer mistake patience for weakness. Pyongyang had fired first, hoping for an upper hand, What they hadn't accounted for was the response of a system that did not panic, did not rush, and did not show itself until the moment of absolute advantage. Inside the intelligence rooms, officers pored over simulations. They compared trajectories, calculated potential retaliation, and attempted to predict every possible outcome. The missile's path had been simple. The response was anything but. Every silent movement of the Navy became a question that demanded an answer. What are they planning? What will happen if they act? And the most chilling thought of all, did they even need to act to hold complete control? The silence was heavier than any alarm. No sirens, no explosions, just digital readouts and subtle movement through oceans. Each carrier strike group, each submarine, each destroyer became a chess piece moving invisibly across a three-dimensional board that Pyongyang could barely perceive. The lesson was clear: strategy exceeds firepower, foresight dominates chaos, and patience often yields more power than aggression. One strike had been intended as dominance, yet what it provoked was an entirely new balance of power. Every moment stretched like elastic. Analysts realized that the missile had done its job in the wrong way. It had revealed more than it had concealed. Pyongyang's command had ignited a scenario they were only beginning to understand. The missile was gone from sight, but the consequences lingered like an unseen storm. One wrong interpretation, one hasty decision, and the Arctic-Pacific theater could shift violently, unpredictably, and irreversibly. Commanders knew the truth but said nothing. The weight of anticipation was louder than any speech. The sea above remained calm, yet beneath it, systems and crews moved with deadly precision. Every sensor, every ping, every silent adjustment of depth or course was a message Pyongyang could feel, even if it could not fully see. The pressure was rising, a slow, inevitable compression that demanded attention, respect, and restraint. And in that moment, one question dominated every mind across the room and across the world. Had Pyongyang truly understood what it had awakened? The missile was launched to intimidate, yet in response, a far greater power had asserted itself quietly, invisibly, and with precision. The warning had arrived without a single shot fired. The real test had begun, and the next move, whether a misstep or a measured decision, would decide not just perception, but dominance itself. The city outside remained eerily still, unaware of the game unfolding in digital grids and beneath ocean waves. But Pyongyang had felt the pressure. The unseen hand of strategic dominance had landed, and it was far heavier than any missile. Every second that passed without action deepened the understanding that they were no longer in control of the narrative. The Navy had taken the stage, silent, precise, and undeniably dominant. And the next ripple, the next calculated response, could decide the fate of more than a city, more than a country. It could rewrite the balance of power in the Pacific forever.